All right, beautiful. Welcome all of my amazing friends, family, and community of Women's Prosperity Network. I am delighted and honored that you're choosing to be here with us this evening as we have Ricardo Gonzalez, the founder and CEO of Bilingual America. He's the author of the 6 Stages of Cultural Mastery and the Cultural Transformation Manifesto. And he's with us tonight to share the results from the cultural health and skill assessment that we did last month. And I want to thank you all for 2 things. Number one, for participating in it, for having the desire to say, I want to learn more about me so that I can learn more about others, so that we can bring the world together in a more beautiful and inclusive way. And really, that is the mission of Cultural Mastery, Bilingual America, Ricardo and his entire team. So thank you all for being here tonight and for taking part in the study. I want to also thank Ricardo for your vision and for your mission and your passion to bring people together. It's what our world needs. This is healing, this is love, this is understanding, it's eradicating fear of the unknown. So thank you, my friend, for the work you're doing and involving Women's Prosperity Network in it.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. So we went through the assessments. The questions are so thought-provoking, like things I hadn't even considered, to be a part of it. So you've awakened things inside of me already, and I haven't even seen the results of the complete study.
Well, first of all, I'm really appreciative of being here, Nancy. And anytime we have an opportunity to just kind of really have a conversation, right? Because I see this more as a conversation than a presentation. And our good friend Dwayne Cummings one time talked with me about the difference between information transfer and information experience, and the power of the experience, right? And so I want this to be a little bit of a conversation. I want this to be not just presentation, not just, sometimes we have to transfer a little bit of information so that people have a framework in which to kind of work. But at the same time, at the end of the day, even though this is a webinar and we're all remote, we can still be connected. And so I appreciate what you're doing, have appreciated you for many, many years, and the one principle, and the influence that you have. So it's an honor. And so as you're ready, I'll go ahead and get started and move forward with this. And we'll just, and I would just say to everyone, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. I know that, Trish will let us know that there's a question. I think it's better to, as we have questions, just to go ahead and put them out there. I'll stop and do my best to answer it in the flow of things, because I think that is a better approach than just everybody kind of holding on to everything at the end, and it gives us a little bit more dynamic in the conversation. So if you have a question, just put it out there, and we'll take it from there, and I'll do my best. I would say this as we get started. We're talking about culture, and we're living in very, very complex times culturally, and there is quite a bit of confusion, I think, and complexity as it relates to culture and the way we're managing culture within our society. It's certainly challenging us, and it's going to get probably a little bit more dicey as we move into the elections here, moving into 2020 and the polarization within our own country. But this happens all over the world. It's not just a US phenomena. People struggle with culture, and because it's the very thing that really determines and drives our identity, right? And so sometimes I'll say to people, if you were born in Turkey or Iran or Afghanistan, the statistical probability that you would be Muslim is like 99%, right? And so culture just, I say to people, people drive data, especially for those of you you're in business, right? And so we're very data conscious. People drive data, but culture drives people. And to me, and my understanding is that culture is the most powerful force on earth. So this is a really important discussion, and I just would ask you to have an open heart, open mind. If you feel that I say something perhaps that just doesn't resonate with you, rather than kind of turning it off, just ask the question, right? Or ask me to clarify, and I'll do my best. You know, lots of sensitivities around culture. And so, you know, a lot of us are kind of, you know, what do we say and when and to who and how, right? So I always just ask people when I'm teaching, you know, if I perhaps would say something in a way that might just not resonate perfectly with you, if you would just let me know, ask me to clarify them, we can have that discussion. Okay. So
Perfect.
we, can you all see my slides? So I want to make sure that you can see my slides. Do you all see my slides? We should be on screen share here.
All right, let me double. Yeah, I had somebody say he's very small.
Yeah, I'm small, but the slides are big.
So they can see them.
That's fine. Yeah, that's kind of the way Zoom works. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of dig in here. So what we're going to talk about is how transforming our cultural relationships actually transforms our cultural realities. So put it another way, we'll never change our cultural realities unless we actually transform our cultural relationships. That's kind of the root issue here. And so I want to talk with you. We can't talk about cultural transformation, and we're going to get to the study, Nancy, but I want to frame this up a little bit here.
Absolutely.
And my understanding is we have until 8 o'clock, so I'll be conscious of that. Okay. So what is transformation? We can't talk about cultural transformation unless we know what two things are. Number one, what transformation is, and number two, what culture is. So I have a little video here I want to show you. And I like this because this actually demonstrates what transformation is. And as you're watching this, ask yourself, what are the three things that really identify as transformation? So just kind of watch this video, and you'll notice these little transformer toys, but just kind of watch this. This is for those of us who need to see it twice.
Okay. Transformers. Okay.
All right. That you just witnessed transformation. So what does that mean? There are 3 lessons about transformation that I just get from these little transformer toys. And here's the first one. Okay. True transformation uses existing pieces. A lot of times, especially in the corporate world, we have people who are quote unquote turnover artists, you know, or they're turnaround people, and they'll come in and they'll fire a bunch of people, but that's not transformation. Transformation actually leverages the existing pieces. So that's the first thing we learn about transformation. The second thing we learn about transformation is that it changes appearance. The actual appearance, the physical visual of what you see is actually different. And then the third thing we learn is that transformation is a process. It doesn't just happen. It is made to happen. Okay, it's created. So we'll talk about that. So what is transformation? In transformation in an organization, for example, or a department, it shifts from being one thing to another. And so what was is no longer, and it's just different. So true cultural transformation requires that all people and elements of culture be transformed. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story here. And this is my own story. This is my mother is on the left, Phyllis, and she was an orphan from the state of Kentucky. My father, Pablo, was one of 27 children from the hills of Puerto Rico. So, Nancy, I am literally a Puerto Rican hillbilly. Okay. I mean, literally. So I'm actually working on a book called Puerto Rican Hillbillies, and the subtitle is Coming to Grips with Your Half-Breed Heritage. You know, so we have a lot of, I think that may actually kind of be a bestseller. Okay. Yeah. But I had this yearning internally for transformation in our home. You know, we didn't need tweaking. We needed transformation because we had so much cultural dysfunction within our home. You know, you can imagine the family members from Kentucky, and you know the one grandmother, now Ricky, I told you, Ricky, don't do that, Ricky, right? and the other one speaking to me in Spanish, pero Ricardito, pero tan lindo tú, pero qué te pasa, mijito? You know, and so as we grew up, we saw all this conflict. And what I learned as an adult, and the reason I went into this field, is number one, to start understanding it myself, but then secondly, that when we can bring true cultural health and healing to people, to organizations, to communities, I mean, for me, it's like, it's so personal, Nancy. It is redemptive in nature, right? And so as we move to cultural transformation, there are some truths about culture that we have to begin to understand. And here's the first one. And that is, until we transform our cultural relationships, we will never transform our cultural realities, okay? So the cultural realities that we experience, whether negative or positive, and we have a lot of negative ones within our culture, okay? And we could talk about those for a long time, but all of us intuitively understand that there are negative cultural realities within our culture. They're just simply the outgrowth of the deeper issues that are present in our actual cultural relationships. So if we heal our cultural relationships, by default, we'll begin to see a better cultural reality. And that's cultural truth number one. The second truth that we have to deal with is that leaders must first experience internal transformation before they can lead external transformation. So one of the things we've seen, Nancy, and for those of you who are listening, just over many years of working in this area, is that a lot of times leaders are very well-meaning. And their intent is proper and is to do the right things. But they've never experienced true internal transformation. In other words, they're not culturally healthy or skilled, okay? So cultural dysfunction is just simply, it's the outcome of cultures that are led by culturally unskilled or unhealthy leaders. Now, we're going to look at this report from the assessments of 53 of you and your group, all female, and you're going to see some things that are probably going to surprise you. And so, but we have to deal with these truths. If we're going to lead external transformation, we must first experience internal transformation.
And
okay?
Ricardo, if I could,
Go ahead, Nancy.
yeah, so this right here is the reason we wanted to do this assessment, this study, to have this conversation, is so Women's Prosperity Network, our mission is to be all-inclusive for all women. And me as a leader, there is cultural dysfunction happening in our community. I know that. So how can I become a better person to improve my cultural relationships, which will then create the transformation in the culture? That's what this is about.
Right, and it's a very important dialogue conversation, and it's, I think sometimes, especially leaders, especially leaders who have founded an organization or a community leader who are kind of at the top of the leadership levels. I think it's very difficult for us to kind of look at ourselves and face ourselves and just even make that admission. I have room to grow.
Yep.
And so this is the second cultural truth. And then the third one is this, that the cultural health of any organization or community is determined by the cultural health of its team members or its citizens. In other words, the parts make the whole. A lot of leaders, in an attempt to kind of frame up culture for their organization, they will policy culture. So they'll set a bunch of rules and they'll say, this is what we believe and these are our values and this is our mission. And, C-suite leaders will sit in an office and they will create the vision statement together. But the reality is you can't policy culture. The parts make the whole. People create culture, not policies. And so it stands to reason that if we have culturally healthy and skilled team members, or if we have culturally healthy and skilled leaders, and citizens, that and only that type of person is going to be able to create a healthy culture. In other words, just to put it kind of frankly, culturally unhealthy and unskilled people cannot create healthy cultures. They just can't. Right. They're incapable of doing so. Yeah. Okay. It's not a slight. It's just a reality, right? So here's the recap. So first of all, cultural relationships must be transformed to transform cultural realities. Okay. Everything else is poking at symptoms. Okay. For example, somebody sent me a video today of a police officer in Texas who approached a black man at his home because he thought that the black man, there was a warrant for his arrest. Well, he had the wrong black man, and he was simply looking for a black man with dreads, but didn't identify the person correctly. There was a bias there, but the black man also reacted out of frustration, fear, anger, whatever those dynamics are. But in order to change that cultural reality, we must absolutely change the dynamic of the cultural relationships, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is that our leaders must first experience internal transformation, or they just simply won't be able to lead the external transformation. And the third thing is the cultural health of the team members or the citizens in a community will determine the cultural health of the team, of the organization, or the community, okay? Okay, so what's culture? Culture is a composite of 5 elements. We can't talk about cultural transformation unless we understand what culture is. The reality is that, and we've done this, most people don't understand culture. Most people don't really know what it is, much less how to work with it. We can't manage what we don't understand. Okay. So the first thing in every culture, there are beliefs. This is the way we think. Okay. The second thing, there are norms. This is what we expect of one another. Okay. And the third thing is there are values. This is what's important to us. Then there are symbols. For example, every sport team has symbols, right? They have a logo, and so do companies, by the way. And companies have their own culture. Whether they recognize it or not, and whether they've tried to policy it or not is irrelevant. But they have beliefs, they have norms, they have values, and they have symbols. And there is language. Now, sometimes that's a full language like English or Spanish, or it can be the way we speak with one another. You know, it can be the nuances of language, and those determine and really build a culture, right? So cultural transformation happens when how we think about one another and the values that we share together and the expectations that we have for one another and the symbols that bind us together and how we speak with one another are transformed. That is cultural transformation. Okay.
Okay.
So how do we create it?
Right.
Okay. The first thing we have to do is to develop culturally healthy and skilled leaders. Now I'm leading up to the report. Okay.
I know you are. This is an important foundation.
Yeah, this is foundational, right? We have to develop culturally healthy and skilled leaders because only, as we know now, culturally healthy and skilled leaders are qualified or equipped to create the cultural environment in which all people of all cultures can thrive. Okay. That is the central core mission of any leader, is to create the environment in which the people can thrive together. My job as a leader is not to make all the decisions. It's to create the environment in which people can thrive, right? Okay, so we have this report, and this is called a Cultural Health and Skill Report, and this is why all of you came tonight, because you want to see this. But before we do this, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, so I do have a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure who it's from.
Okay.
It says Min, but I don't know who that is. The question is, and you may get to this later, what thoughts do you have about the Israeli culture, specifically to women and more so American women? I do not know easy ways to deal with individuals.
Okay. So when we have disconnects, right? And actually that's a good question to lead me into where I need to go. Okay. Okay. So the same question could be asked about millennials. The same exact question could be asked about Muslims. The same exact question could be asked by a conservative, a social conservative, about people who are LGBTQ+. The same exact question could be asked by a baby boomer about Gen Z, right? It's not a question of specificity. It's a question of process. In other words, and we'll get to this, how do I, with whatever my select group may be, right? How do I connect? How do I create? And how do I collaborate with that culture? That's the question. That's the real question. Okay?
Right.
Now, whoever's asking the question is making that specific to one group of people. But my answer would be the same no matter what group of people that question is framed within. Okay? So let's kind of move to that.
Okay.
Okay. So when we develop culturally healthy and skilled leaders, we do this through what we call cultural mastery training or experience. Okay. And I wrote a book that's called The 6 Stages of Cultural Mastery, which, by the way, some of you know Dwayne Cummings. He wrote the foreword for, and this is the only book that LeaderCast has ever put their logo on. So that was
impressive.
And so what I do in 6 Stages of Cultural Mastery is map out this process. Okay. And what it does is it teaches two things. It teaches a mindset and it teaches a skill set. Okay? Both are absolutely necessary. So mindset determines how we view one another. Skill set determines how we treat one another. Okay? There has to be a balance between the head and the hand. Okay? And so both are just completely necessary to create cultural transformation of the relationship. Okay? How do we see each other and how do we treat each other? Okay? So these 6 stages, Nancy, so let's go back to the question. Okay? I would say to the person, the first thing that I would encourage you to do is to educate yourself about Jewish people. Okay? And specifically about the experience of Israeli women, right? Because that was the question.
Well, and okay. I think the question was how the Israeli culture treats women and American women. I think that was the bridge.
Well, that's stage 1. That's education. Okay, so here's one thing that we know about culture. It is. Okay, it is. If we come to the culture dialogue with the idea that my culture is better than your culture, or my culture is right and your culture is wrong, we have no way, we have to get neutral. Culture is. Okay? Culture is created, it's the aggregate, it's the composite of the experiences of the people within that region or within that organization or within that community. They created it. They may not even known that they were creating it, but they did. Okay? So culture just is. Everyone got to exactly where they are culturally, honestly. Okay, so I'll put this out to your group. Does anybody want to take a shot? You can put this in the chat. The difference between enculturation and acculturation. There's 2 different words. Anybody want to take a shot at that?
All right, so the difference between enculturation and acculturation. A-C-U-L-T-U-R-A-T.
All right. I'll go ahead and answer it because at least I put the question out there. Enculturation happens to all of us when we're young. When we're young, we are enculturated by our parents. We're enculturated by our families as young people, from babies up. That is enculturation. We had no choice, right? Okay, so I spent several years in Puerto Rico, and guess what I like? I like rice and beans and fried plantains, and I like salsa, and I like piña coladas, right? And the reason is because I'm Puerto Rican. Okay? And if you grew up in Mexico, why do you like a different type of music? Why do you like a different type of food? Because you were enculturated, right? And if you grew up in the Southern Bible Belt in a Southern Baptist home, guess what happened?
Very different.
You were in culture. That's the power of culture, right? So we all come to this honestly. Okay, and this is a very important point, but stage 1 is education. Once I educate myself openly about people from another culture, in other words, I just learn, multiple things about them. In the book, I talk specifically about things we need to learn. Stage 2 is engagement. How do we meaningfully engage together with people? Because when we educate ourselves and when we engage properly, a beautiful thing happens, Nancy, and that is we get to stage 3, which is empathy. And empathy doesn't mean I feel sorry for you or I feel for you. Empathy is a Latin term, empathos, which means in passion. When I get to real empathy, means I'm passionate about you. Which, by the way, is when bias is converted from negative bias to positive bias. You can't actually do away with bias, but you can convert it, you can transform it from negative bias to positive bias, but you only do that through education and engagement, right? And then you get to empathy. Now, when I'm passionate about you, I'll get to stage 4, which is excitement, which is I'm excited about the relationship because I see your talents, gifts, abilities for what they are, right? I'm truly passionate about you, okay? And then in excitement, I want to actually do something with you because I'm excited about the relationship, right?
Got it.
And then you get to stage 5, which is empowerment, which is how do we make this vision happen? And then we get to stage 6, which is the most beautiful of all, which is endearment. And the goal of our cultural relationships has to shift from cultural tolerance to cultural endearment. We have to learn to love one another, not put up with each other.
Big difference.
Huge difference.
Big difference.
Antithesis to hate is love, not tolerance. And people are talking about cultural tolerance. It's the silliest thing. It's actually dangerous because we're out here gritting our teeth at one another, putting up with each other. Now, we don't fall in love. We grow into it. And the whole purpose of the 6 stages of cultural mastery is to teach us, not just for us to fall in love with them and their culture, but for them to fall in love with us and our culture. And by the way, that does not require cultural agreement. We don't have to be like someone else to love them.
Very good.
Okay? I don't have to give up my culture to love yours, nor do you have to give up yours to love mine. And this is important because we've come to a point in our country where if you don't agree with me, I'm going to defriend you.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? So we're not divided because we disagree. We're divided because we're disagreeable.
Very big difference.
Okay? So we want to get to cultural endearment. And this is the training and the experiences we put people through. So here's the beauty of it. When people are culturally endeared to one another, they'll sacrifice ego because that's what love does, and they'll work for the common good together. Why don't our politicians work together for the common good? Because they are not endeared to one another.
No, they're out for themselves and
they're driven by ego.
Yep.
Okay? So true collaboration depends on cultural endearment, always. So if I have a team of people working in my company, and if they are not truly culturally endeared to one another, we can, and we'll get to this, we can do all the diversity in the world we want, but if we haven't brought these people to a point of endearment, guess what happens? It splinters. Okay?
Time and time
Here's
again.
what I say. Cultural diversity makes sure everyone gets to the game. We're almost at the study. Okay? And that'll be the wrap. But I just felt it's important that we get this framework. Okay? Cultural, we have the diversity and inclusion movement today, right? And cultural diversity just is designed to make sure everyone gets to the game. Okay? Cultural inclusion requires that everyone plays in the game. Okay? But cultural mastery is the true leveraging and development of those relationships, getting us to endearment. And what it does is it ensures that everyone wins in the game together.
So
okay? Because we can have diversity and inclusion, but if we have a company that's not ready for it, or if we have other leaders in the company who are not culturally healthy and skilled, what are they going to do with all that diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
They're going to repel it.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a worst case scenario, the people will just get fed up with it and they'll leave. And in the normal scenario, they end up tolerating each other. And the craziest thing is, in our companies, we bring in diversity and inclusion. We talk about harmony and unity and cultural, right? And what do? We create segregated employee resource groups within our companies. And all of a sudden, we've got these people in their own silos.
Once again, not really bringing everybody.
Not really developing cultural endearment, rather pushing things into cultural segregation, which is not the goal, right?
Well, so Ricardo, I really want to acknowledge you, and Susie Q, who's with us tonight, said the same thing. She said, this is powerful, walking past cultural tolerance to embracing and loving one another. And the people in corporate who brought in diversity and then inclusion type things, they were only doing what they knew how. This is why we need you.
Well, Xerox was the first company in 1970, by the way, that actually started an employee resource group with diverse groups of people. And then everybody else kind of came on. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, Deloitte has the first company now that has done away with ERGs and BRGs. And they have said, we're just ERGs is employee resource groups and BRGs are business resource groups, but they're segregated cultural groups. Yes. So in a large company, you have a employee resource group for Latinos. and you have one for women, and you have one for LGBTQ plus, and you have one for Asians, and you have one for African Americans. And so all of these separate groups are out here created, right? And they're all fighting for the same attention and the same funding. They're unbelievably historically non-funded, right? They don't have a true voice at the table. And so Deloitte has said, no, we are going to just simply start holding our leaders accountable to give everyone a proper seat at the table.
There you go.
Which is a great move on Deloitte's part, right? And yet, if those leaders who are being held accountable are not culturally healthy and skilled, it'll break down.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. It is completely dependent on the ability to have culturally healthy and skilled leaders. Okay. So that leads us into your study.
All right, good. And I want to share, Kristen works with teens, and she says, I love this, and I want to incorporate it in my teen programs.
Which is awesome, Kristen. I look forward to speaking with you on the backside regarding this.
Beautiful.
And we're going to give an opportunity on the backside, Nancy, for people to connect with us. We view these as relationships. This is all about the relationship, right? Here's your study.
Okay.
53 of you took the cultural assessment. And for those of you who are on the call who took it, you know that there's some really deep questions. And it's kind of a mirror on the soul. And then when you get your score, which is automatic on the backside, you go, uh-oh, but you kind of knew.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, just so you all know this, and I want to give kudos to PhD candidate Justine Gonzalez, who is on this call. Justine is actually my niece, but she's with Cultural Mastery Group. She owns a company called Educator Aid, and that particular company specifically takes cultural mastery to the educational sector. Okay. And she's doing some amazing things. In fact, she had the head of diversity and inclusion for the Department of Education for the state of Indiana tell her a couple of weeks ago, we want to get cultural mastery into every school in the state of Indiana.
Woof.
So Justine, you have my utmost respect and love. But Justine has been a very important person in the data and the graphing of the Cultural Health and Skill Report. She's also facilitated a couple of PhDs in statistics and academics who have reviewed this study, not your particular study, but the process for two things that every assessment requires, and that's validity and reliability. Okay. Validity speaks to what are we testing against, right? So these questions are designed to test against the principles of cultural mastery as mapped out in the 6 stages of cultural mastery. That's the validity. Reliability is it consistent? And I can tell you after doing multiple of these now, it's very consistent. In fact, we just did one for a group of Latino leaders in Atlanta. There were 50 Latino leaders, right? And that was a mixed group of men and women. And your scores are very, very similar.
Interesting. Okay.
Very interesting.
And
right?
again, let's also share one more time that your personal individual results are not shared. They're kept private. You got yours. And
Right.
And if people just want to take the assessment, let's say somebody's on here, but they didn't do the assessment, can they still go ahead to find out their own?
Yeah, they can still, I'll put in the chat. They can go to here. I'll just put it in the chat here. culturalmastery.com/assessment.
Yeah, it was eye-opening for sure.
Yeah. And no one will see, the people who do the graphing and stuff, but it will give you a great response. Okay, so let's move forward here.
Okay.
So just to understand the report. So we had 53 women in your network take this. Okay.
Yep.
9 to 10, it's a 10-point scale. 9 to 10 is considered expert cultural skill. 8 to 8.99 is advanced. 7 to 7.99 is intermediate. 6 to 6.99 is basic. 5 to 5.99 is novice, and 4.99 and below is considered culturally non-skilled. Nancy, would you like to take a guess at the aggregate score for these 53 women?
I'm a little nervous.
Okay. All right. We have the chat, so let's be a little interactive here. Let's be a little experiential. Will you ladies put what you believe to be the aggregate score for your group of 53 women? And you can see the scale there.
All right, so I'm going to put my guess in there.
Okay. Okay.
Linda says 5.5. Joy Grace, you can go to culturalmastery.com to take the culturalmastery.com/assessment.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you go to just culturalmastery.com, you can click on resources and then you can get the sub menu where it says assessment. Okay.
there you go.
Okay. So you all are okay.
We got some
So I
8.
like Diana Noble, my hope.
Yeah, there you go. 6.
Okay. Okay.
Jeannie says 8.
Jeannie says 8. And
Yeah.
that's because her husband's an author and they're just optimistic, right?
And international world travelers and all that
Yeah.
stuff, right?
The guerrilla marketing books.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. All right. We're going to just close that. And here's the slide, y'all. I'm going to show you a slide that has by the way, Jeannie, I would love to meet your husband. Just.
Yeah, he passed away a few years.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
Oh,
did.
I'm so sorry, Jeannie.
Yeah, carrying on the legacy in a beautiful.
I apologize. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy, for correcting.
Welcome.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Here you go. The overall score for the group is 5.44.
Okay.
Which is considered novice. And as it relates to cultural background, because there are 5 different areas that were assessed, cultural background 5.61. As it relates to stereotypes and bias, 7.25. So just got into the intermediate range there. Cultural experience, 5.42. Cultural leadership, 6.83. And cultural knowledge, really pulled this down.
Wow, yeah.
2.80. Okay. So that's the aggregate. This is another way of looking at it. And what this does is it kind of plots it on a trend line. And it shows you from your standpoint of your group, just the disparity of where everyone is at.
So these dots are the 53 different.
The dots represent the people.
Okay.
Right. Nancy, I could have put your name on one of those dots and just, but we didn't.
And I'd be okay with that.
I know you would, but we didn't do it. We never do that.
Yeah. And Jeannie says she would love to meet you. You see that? Yeah. Yeah, and I can self-disclose, right?
No, you could, but you don't have to. That's up to you.
Well, and here's the thing.
Totally private, right?
Yeah, well, and I want to get to the 8, 9, and 10 on the chart. That's my goal, because yes. I love people, and the fact that I scored, I think I was like 6.6 or something like that.
Okay.
The fact that that's where I scored tells me I have a lot to learn.
We have a lot of growth in this area. It used to be that the ideal leader had high IQ, right? Mm-hmm. And then the whole thing on emotional intelligence came around, right? But right now we need cultural intelligence. We're working in a very, very complex world culturally and from a standpoint of diversity. By the way, I want to say something. Almost all of our challenges as it relates to culture are cultural in nature. They are not race in nature. If we continue to kind of make this conversation about race, we'll continue to struggle to solve our cultural issues because we're simply addressing the wrong issue.
The wrong issue. I mean, you can look at it when you have, let's use Latin America, Latinos, Colombians, Spaniards, Cubans, Venezuelan. I mean, there's different cultures and disparity and cultural mistrust and stuff among all of those. I've seen it. I know lots of Latinos living here in South Florida, and I hear how Puerto Ricans talk about, Venezuelan or Cuban.
Sure, absolutely. And by the way, Latinos are not a race.
Right.
We're a conglomerate of multiple ethnicities, right? From like 22 different countries. And the second largest Latino population in the world is in the United States. And a lot of people don't know this, but because language is one of the 5 elements of culture, there are more first language Spanish speaking people in the world than first language English speaking people. So it's a huge opportunity in market. But you're absolutely correct. Like, the Cubans have, essentially controlled the market in Miami. And it's really hard for the Venezuelans and the Puerto Ricans to kind of break into some of those markets.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of cultural complexity there. So, most of our issues are along the lines of cultural dysfunction, not so much racial dysfunction, but that's what's getting the headlines in the United States. And as long as that continues to be the narrative, we're probably never really going to solve our issues. We have to change the dialogue.
Right, we're having the wrong conversation.
This is interesting because you perceived yourself. We asked a question at the very beginning. Where do you think you're at? So the aggregate perception that I think will be at 6.68, we actually ended up at 5.44. Okay. So I want to just walk you through some of the data, not all the data. At the end of the webinar, we'll give you an email address where you can just send in and ask for the report itself. Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. So this is really fascinating because we ask a question about groups that you have difficulty connecting with. And what's really interesting that the two main groups from your people were political right and political left, which just underscores that the division in our country is, and this is kind of consistent in what we're seeing. The division in our country is along political ideologies and social ideologies. And so the other thing that you can see here is Gen Z. That's the other large area.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's before millennials, right? Which is okay. So that's just one piece of data that I think is interesting.
Go back one for me, because it was a little hard for me to read. What's the one on the bottom that's also large? It looks like a 5.9% difficulty.
Let me put my glasses on here.
I know it's a little blurry on the screen.
Muslims. That's Muslims.
Okay, interesting.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But if you do the same exact thing with a group of conservative ministers, which we've done,
mm-hmm.
right? It's almost 50% LGBTQ plus.
That's where they have the most difficulty connecting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it depends sometime on the group, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Here's a very interesting one. This is about discomfort with gender. So you have in your group, 15 of the people, either 13 say sometimes uncomfortable with the other gender in the workplace, and 2 somewhat frequently. So out of 50, that's nearly 35%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If those numbers held, that's a very high percentage of discomfort with gender in the workplace.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder if because there's a slant, as it were, because we're a women's group.
No, actually, there are a lot of men who are uncomfortable in the workplace with women right now because the problem, maybe the unintended consequences of the Me Too movement, where you have a lot of men who are like not sure maybe what to say or how or when and how to approach. So it's complicated, right? Culture is complicated.
Yeah.
And this is the necessity of being able to actually develop ourselves properly, right? So we get to cultural endearment. Because the beauty of cultural endearment is when we actually love each other, we have freedom to talk with one another. Yeah. Right? A lot of people talk about cultural sensitivity. I think we have to do away with cultural sensitivity, and we have to talk about cultural skill. Cultural sensitivity implies pain. If my teeth are sensitive, I'm going to the dentist, right? And so, and I agree, Kristen, everyone should feel respected or valued within the workplace. Everyone, whether men, women, doesn't matter. Everyone should be valued and respected. Okay. So here's another one as it relates to generational disconnect in your group. It was complete. This may tell a little bit about your group and the age group of the group, right? But 66% said Gen Z, and then the other 28% were millennials. And so this probably just simply means that your group is maybe the people who took this assessment are not in these age groups, right?
Right.
Okay. This one's interesting because there are 8 people in your group who will not talk about political or religion or social issues, and that just means we're closed down, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are 7 who say they avoid it, which is almost the same as will not. And then 16 are uncomfortable. So that just tells us that the nature of our cultural conversations are really limited, right? And if culture drives people and we can't talk about it, we have to address that. Okay.
Right. Closed off from it. Yeah.
As far as stereotypical thinking, I think this is really telling. 27 in the group said sometimes.
So say this again. So what
Okay,
is
this is how frequently does one engage in thinking stereotypically about another group of people. Okay, so 27 said sometimes, 6 said under pressure, and 1 said regularly. But that 27 is concerning,
mm-hmm.
right? Okay, it's just very telling.
Yep.
How frequently do we label people who are different from ourselves negatively? I got 13 sometimes, 12 under pressure.
That's almost half.
It's half.
Yeah.
Right. And the beauty of this is it uncovers it. But the challenge of this is, Nancy, you're probably working with like the cream of the crop.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me wonder if we were to do these types of assessment with a normal person, right?
Yeah.
Who's not already a leader, not a developed, educated person, because you're working with an educated group of people.
Right. People who are interested in growing, people who
Absolutely. Okay.
are willing to look at themselves. That's who answered the assessment. Yeah.
This one I think is just fascinating because of just the disparity of experiences culturally that people have. Just
Okay,
from a
so
step.
what does this mean?
This is cultural experience. These are things like, just travel, the way we engage with other people. There's a whole set of questions around this. The way we, if we're with a new immigrant, do we engage that person or do we just kind of wait on them? These kinds of, what's the experience we actually have with culture and cultural differences? Here's one that I think is really fascinating that I pulled out because this is really important. We have all of this talk right now about social equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And social justice. But the amazing thing is that we're having all of this conversation about social justice, and very few of us are even sure. We're like all over the place on this.
Right. What does that mean? Right.
What does it even mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so how do we have conversations about things within our culture when we don't even understand the basic, what do these terms mean? And what does it really mean? And remember we talked about creating mindset and skill set?
Yes.
That's the whole cultural mastery experience, right? I have to develop mindset and I have to develop skill set. And then this one is on cultural knowledge. And this one is just fascinating because it's fascinating. You actually had several people who scored 0 on those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things like, what is bigotry? What is xenophobia? What is, and we just don't know. Right. And so it's just a fascinating thing. So I'll stop. We're almost done.
Wow. My mind is, I'm surprised by a few of the answers and yet not, because, and like you said a minute ago, the people that are here on this webinar, the people that did the assessment with us are people who wanted to know about themselves so they could grow and advance. That's who's here.
Let me encourage your group. And I'm going to talk right now about a case study that we're doing. And I have the permission from the president of the college to do this. Okay.
Okay.
So I wrote, and I want to make this available to everybody. It's called the Cultural Transformation Manifesto. So we have the book, 6 Stages of Cultural Transformation, Cultural Mastery, but this is the Cultural Transformation Manifesto. And this maps out how do we fully transform our cultural relationships and realities within an organization or within a community. And we're seeing some amazing things. And so we're doing a case study right now with this called Johnston Community College. And this is in the manifesto. The president of the college, his name is Dr. David Johnson. He's a former Southern Baptist minister. Fantastic guy. He heard me speak at a conference in Raleigh, North Carolina, and engaged me, and we engaged. And initially it was like, how do we get more diversity of students, and how do our teachers work better with diverse students and stuff? And I said to him, you're addressing the symptoms, not the root cause. Mm-hmm. The root issue is the dysfunction of the cultural relationships. And so what we did was we set out with his agreement. This is a county, by the way, that was like the seat of KKK activity in North Carolina. Wow. Okay. This is a racially divided county. And he got this vision of how can we actually transform first our college, and then if we are successful doing so, can we transform our community? And we're well on that path. It's just one of the most amazing things I've ever been involved in my life.
Beautiful.
We have now taken 24 core leaders through cultural mastery. To the person, they have said, we need to embed these principles within our college, to our teachers, to our students. They're even asking now, how do we get every new student who comes into college? By the way, there are 8,000 students, so it's not a little community college. How do we get every new student who comes into the Johnston Community College to embrace the principles of cultural mastery? How do we get this to every teacher to embrace the principles? So we did core groups of leadership with trustees, President Johnson, deans, vice presidents, division heads, 24 of them. The 24 of them, along with myself and Justine, are going to come together in a cultural transformation summit in July. And together, now that they are culturally healthy and skilled, we are going to set the vision for cultural transformation for the rest of the college so that it is meaningful and sustainable. It is the most amazing thing, Nancy. And I mapped this out in the Cultural Transformation Manifesto. When Dr. Johnson and his initial group of deans took the assessment that we're dealing with right here, and I'm saying this to encourage you all, okay? Because the purpose of this is not to make anyone feel bad. The purpose of this is to allow us to see where we're really at so we can become much better. Because the benefits of becoming cultural masters are so strong, right? First of all, we decrease risk. We eliminate, so much of turnover is because people are just unhappy within the culture of a company or an organization. So we limit risk. People don't sue people that they are endeared to.
Right.
Right? So that's important. We also unleash creativity because when people are free to be who they are, they become much more creative. And when they're endeared together, they become much more collaborative. What happens in a team that is both creative and collaborative? What happens to our products and services? They exponentially improve.
Yeah.
Right? They also become culturally relevant because now we have culturally healthy and skilled people who understand the importance of cultural relevance in the development of product and service, which drives sales. So ultimately, when people become cultural masters and we transform our teams, ultimately we become much, much more productive, right?
Yeah.
We have higher levels of performance and we are much more profitable. Everyone wins. We have an opportunity. We think we have the cure for cultural cancer here, but it won't be done with one day off seminars about social justice or race issues or xenophobia or bigotry or bias. It is a process of transformation that first as individual leaders we must go through, but then to lead our teams to that full and total transformation so that we can become much more creative and collaborative together, so that our salespeople can connect much more quickly with people who are different from themselves. The benefits are so multiple. They're so powerful, right?
Yeah.
So this is not just about kumbaya, right? This isn't about just feeling good together. This is about fundamental transformation of our cultural relationships so we can transform by proxy our cultural realities. It will never happen just because.
No.
It will happen because we have an intelligent and we have an intuitive process that people will actually go through. So, that being said, here's the last slide. And this is a very simple invitation. There's my email address. If you will send me an email, I will send you both this report in its entirety, right? And also a copy of the Cultural Transformation Manifesto. Okay, so it's a simple email address, ricardo@culturalmastery.com. And we want to partner. We want to help you to be the best version of you, right? And we're living in this unbelievably diverse world, which creates so much opportunity. But if we're not prepared, we'll miss the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I just am asking all of us, let's be part of the solution, not the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So with that, there's the email address. And then for those of you who enjoy other types of connection, I love connecting on LinkedIn. So mine is /Ricardo Gonzalez 1. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, or if you're a Twitter person, you can see the different ways there. Nancy, I will turn it back to you. I hope this has been interesting and enthralling, and I love this opportunity. And I love you. We've known each other for some time now.
Yes.
And I know the power of your group, and you guys are amazing. So would you all just send me a quick email? And that's the simplest way to do this. And Nancy, back to you. And if anybody has any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
So first of all, thank you, Ricardo. You reached out and I knew about your book. We had seen each other at some conferences. And then when you had all of these pieces ready, that's when our conversation began. And it immediately just, it touched my soul. It's in alignment with being the one.
Yeah.
Like, how can I be the one if I'm not at Endearment? If I haven't gone through the stage of education, number 2 was engagement, excitement, empathy, all of those pieces. I need to go through that. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you to Justine. She's here. I've got some great comments in here. Robin says, outstanding presentation. Jeannie Levinson, Ricardo, this webinar was fascinating. Thank you for presenting it to us. You're awesome. I look forward to studying more. And Nancy, thank you for presenting this assessment, and Ricardo to our group. Diana Noble, CCC, we, absolutely. She brought it all in. Oh, the ones that she knew, right? So Kristen said, I want in. How can I help? And so the way to do it, my friends, is we have to transform. This is where it takes place. Let's go back to that beginning when he showed us the car that transformed. It's about taking our existing pieces, the awesomeness that we are, the loving, beautiful women we are, and transforming to be cultural masters.
I have an idea here.
Go for it.
I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah.
We work with cultural mastery in cohorts of 6 people. Maybe you could get together 6 women who would commit to going through the cultural mastery experience. It's an 8-week experience. Take about 3 hours of your time a week. Okay. And perhaps you could put that out there. So Kristen says, me. I'll be up front. It's $1,600 a person. But it's an amazing experience. And I will commit, if you will commit, I will commit to facilitating your group, the first one. Okay. Wow. And we would love to see on this, but if you can pull together a group for a cohort, Nancy, we would love to make that happen for you.
Beautiful, okay. Beautiful. All right. So thank you for that. I am going to be doing it. So let's get 5 more or 2 groups, because what happens to our world and then the ripple from it when we transform, my friends, that's the next step for all of us. So go ahead and email Ricardo at culturalmastery.com. And you can tell him I'm in, I want to be in a cohort. You can email me, Nancy at Women's Prosperity Network. And we have the power. We can be the change. Somebody actually wrote that in one of the comments.
Yeah. I wish Justine were in audio, but I want to share a story that she shared with me. In every cohort, in addition to going through the cultural mastery processes and experience, everybody also chooses a cultural concentration. So you actually learn a culture as you go through, but you get paired up with one other person. And we typically try to pair you up with someone you don't know well and someone you're fairly different from.
Oh, I like it.
So we had something happen in Indiana where we had 2 principals, and one was very conservative on the right, and the other one was very liberal on the left. And these 2 gentlemen didn't communicate much together. Principals within the same school system. And Justine, I hope I'm doing justice to this story. When they got to stage 4 of setting vision together, and they had truly educated themselves about one another, and they had engaged meaningfully, and they had come to true empathy and passion for one another, you know what they did? Together, they set a vision together to create a foundation to help underprivileged young men in their community. 2 men who before were just worlds apart.
Yeah.
And there are many stories that we're starting to see like this. So you may see out of your group something even more amazing happen. And because we're seeing it in the cohorts, that there's some really meaningful activity that takes place. It's really exciting.
Oh, beautiful. I got goosebumps. So that's like, this is good stuff. This is what we need, because what I know to be true is that whenever there's conflict, anger, it's based in a lack of understanding and a lack of endearment, as you call it. That's what's going to heal our world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Thank you for being here tonight, Ricardo, for doing this study. Justine, thank you as well. Thank you to your entire team, for everybody who's here tonight. I appreciate you. Email Ricardo at culturalmastery.com, and you can let him know if you want to be in a cohort. You can also email me, and let's do this together, my friends. I love you all, and I thank you, Ricardo.
It's awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Have a beautiful night. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all.
You're most welcome. All right.